Good afternoon and welcome to the WAVY Digital Desk. Today we're talking about concussions in kids. So we know fall sports are up and running. You see kids playing on school or club teams. You're watching college sports or NFL on the TV. So it's all around us. Well, today we're going to talk about what happens when kids get injured, specifically with concussion. So student athletes are going to experience this. I mean, we hope not, but let's learn, what to look out for, how will they recover, and more. So we have neuropsychologist Racheal Smetana here with us from the Sports Concussion Consultation Clinic at UVA to talk about the clinic, concussions in kids, and prevention. Racheal, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Absolutely. Well, to start, do you just want to tell us a little bit about the clinic, and then we'll jump in, to sort of concussions in kids, and we can sort of wrap up. But, what is this clinic? It's new to UVA. It's new in the neighborhood, I guess, of Virginia.
Yeah, we really developed this clinic because we wanted to be able to provide additional sports concussion services to our community. We recognize that concussion, unfortunately, it does occur in sports. It does occur to our kids, so we wanted to be able to provide services. The Sports Concussion Consultation Clinic is a specialty clinic for youth and teen athletes. So we see anywhere from ages say 12 to young adult, like 22 to 24, who've had a concussion related to sports. Now, our concussion clinic is a little bit different in that we do not see anyone who's had a concussion. We're a specialty clinic that serves kids and teens that might be having symptoms that persist from a concussion beyond what we would expect in a typical recovery timeline. So most kids and teens, they have a concussion. Their school will put them on like a return to play protocol, which is a slow stepwise progression as they start to feel better. And most kids and teens will start to feel better on their own in a couple days to a couple weeks. But some youth take longer to recover from concussion, and this clinic is really designed to serve those kids. So after a few weeks, if these kids aren't getting better, they can come see me, and we try to figure out what symptoms are persisting, why those symptoms are persisting, and how to address those symptoms so we can get them back to playing sports.
Right, and we hope obviously that that's not the sort of across the board reaction to concussions. You hope, is it about 2 weeks that you sort of see that, completion, if you will, of that recovery, or is it longer? I mean, I guess I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but, just to start, what are the symptoms and signs of concussions when kids are on the field? I don't know if it's an elbow to the head, they're taking a fall, maybe it's a hit in football. I mean, there's so many different things that can cause this, but what are those initial signs and symptoms?
Yeah, and you're right. It can look so different, and kids can react differently too. So no concussion is alike. There isn't a classic, this is what a concussion looks like. I think when we think of concussion, especially in sports, and when we see it portrayed in the media, we think about someone getting knocked down really hard and knocked out, not being able to get back up. And that's not what most concussions look like. Some kids can get back up right away, and then, oh, okay, they might feel a little dizzy, or they just might feel a little off or not like themselves. They might have a headache that develops. They might have some balance problems. After a few hours, they might kind of feel a little more foggy. So I like to talk to families about, if you get hit, if you feel even just a little bit off, you tell someone. Or when a kid gets hit, just pull them and assess. We don't know usually, we don't often know right away, okay, this has been a concussion. We need to assess to determine, was this hit, a threshold of a concussion level? And so by pulling the kid, kind of seeing, okay, do you feel a little off? Do you not? Going through that sideline assessment is how we're able to tell. So if a kid gets hit, pull them, assess, don't just rely on, oh, it doesn't look like a classic concussion per se.
And, in those first, few hours after a concussion, is that the most, I guess, particular time, if you will, to watch out for some of these signs and symptoms? Do they have an immediate onset, or is there a window that you really need to be paying attention to your student athlete?
Yeah, it's typically immediate within the first 30 minutes to a few hours. When kids are playing sports, the adrenaline is high, so it might not be immediate right that second because that adrenaline is still there. But as that adrenaline wears off, and then those first few hours is when people really have told me that's when they just feel awful. They don't feel great. They can tell something is off. So usually that's when we would want to assess and diagnose that concussion and just make sure they chill out after that. They rest a little bit because their head just took a hit.
And are there certain symptoms where, they're going to be okay to rest at home? They're going to be okay to sort of follow, a more typical recovery response versus are there red flags, right away where, you might need to seek that extra medical care?
Yeah, and oftentimes the athletic trainer or the licensed healthcare provider that's on the field is able to make that call and recognize those signs and symptoms if it's more significant, if they are knocked out for a longer period of time, or there's other more concerning neurological signs that the healthcare professional is picking up on, they would then caution the family and be able to recognize that additional support should be sought from a healthcare facility. But in general, for concussions, kids can go home with their parents at the end of the night, just get a good night's sleep, get some rest. They might take the next day off if they're not feeling great, and that's okay too. After about 48 hours or so, we do want kids to go back into their typical activities, though. We used to treat concussion like this cocooning where you have to sit in the dark, turn off all the lights, and you can't do anything until you feel 100% better. And we don't follow that anymore. After a day or two, we want to gradually go back to activities as those symptoms should start to get better.
That's interesting. Was there something or research wise that sort of shifted that mindset of that darkness and cocoon versus sort of getting back into that daily life?
Yeah, there's been so much research on concussion over the past 10 to 15 years, and so many fabulous scientists doing the research. And we've just learned more about the brain after concussion, and we've done a lot of research on activity and exercise after concussion, and particularly in athletes. So kids, people in general who are used to moving every day, are used to exercise. We found that exercise is actually really helpful in that concussion recovery process and getting kids back to playing the sport that they want to. Obviously, we don't want to go right back into a sports game and go back into competition. We don't want to run a lot, the day after a concussion, but we want to slowly increase those activities again.
And, is there a window where there could be an issue if you were to re enter, let's say, contact sports and have another hit within a certain window? I mean, is that something that you all worry about?
There's a rare phenomenon called second impact syndrome, which is why we pull anyone who's had a concussion from a game. So second impact syndrome can occur if someone has had a concussion, goes back in and gets hit really hard again. And then that could lead to potentially a more significant brain injury beyond a concussion. Now, just because someone has a concussion and then gets hit again right away, that doesn't mean that they're going to have that type of second impact syndrome. Like I said, it's very rare, but the risk for having a more significant brain injury by entering the game again so quickly is there, which is why we follow that return to play protocol to wait until symptoms have gone down a bit to go back to play.
And then you all, chart kids and student athletes that have symptoms beyond that 2 weeks. So, what are symptoms that, could persist or maybe that you all see in a general way of these kids that are coming in? Is it obvious? Are they things that maybe a parent would notice on sort of a minute level? I mean, what are you all seeing?
Yeah, so the symptoms that persist tend to be the symptoms that come after a concussion. So kids might tell me, well, I'm still feeling dizzy when I'm trying to run and play and get back into the game, or I still feel just foggy when I'm trying to think in school. Some kids might feel more anxious, so irritability, more anxiety is typical after a concussion, but sometimes those persist. Sometimes that anxiety is just fearfulness of having had the concussion. Visual changes, so just kind of difficulty focusing their eyes. I ask questions about all the different possible symptoms of concussion when I meet with these families to try to figure out what exactly is persisting, and then try to uncover why that's persisting, and then how do we actually treat that symptom to make them better. So oftentimes I tell parents, and just keep asking their kid how they're feeling. And if they're reporting still feeling off, not feeling totally like themselves, we do expect that to get better. It might take a couple weeks, even up to a month sometimes. But if they seem like they're just staying the same, that they're really not getting better at all, there's no improvement, then we'd want to see them and try to do some very specific interventions.
And what are some of the interventions? Are they months long programs? Are they weeks? Does it just sort of depend on how they're responding?
Yeah, it really depends on the symptom. So if someone's experiencing a lot of dizziness and there's a vestibular component, so that inner ear component to that dizziness, we would say, okay, maybe a few weeks of physical therapy, maybe a little more than that, really kind of targeted treatment to get them back. Same with the visual tracking difficulties, some occupational or physical therapy with anxiety, maybe some just really targeted mental health treatment to work through that. We're not talking months to years, but targeted, what's the symptom, and then getting them in with the providers that can help really do that treatment.
And if a student athlete doesn't come in, or maybe doesn't, find help for maybe more long-term symptoms, is there a possibility that could lead to other things? Is there something that you all are trying to prevent by figuring out these symptoms?
We're just trying to get kids back to play. So these symptoms, if they're not treated, they can continue to persist. And we don't want anyone to have to deal with these types of symptoms for months to years because they're not getting the specific treatment that could help them. So our goal is really to prevent someone coming in and saying, well, I haven't played the sport I love or done the thing I love for months to years because no one has helped me. And so we're just trying to provide good education to the community on concussion and get kids back to playing as quickly as we can so that they can do the things they love.
And, just to make it clear to everyone, if they're, have these student athletes that experience these symptoms that last longer, you all are a referral clinic, right? So
Yes.
People can't just go online. So what's the best way, I guess, for them? Is it communicating with either that pediatrician or coach or trainer about what they're experiencing?
Yep, that's a great question. So any type of referral can get in. You just cannot self-refer. So an athletic trainer of a school can refer to us. That can be sometimes the easiest point of contact for families to use, but a pediatrician can. Any type of other healthcare provider they might see regularly can refer to us. But oftentimes the school athletic trainer just emailing or giving us a call or faxing in a referral would work.
Great. And then, the other side to this is prevention, right? How do you even prevent a concussion from happening, or maybe give yourself the best opportunity, for that not to happen? I know that it is difficult to prevent, just like any other accident or injury, completely, especially in sports that are a little bit more contact based. But, where do you all stand on that, on the side of prevention?
Yeah, so when we talk about prevention, you're right, we can't 100% prevent a concussion, but it's all about reducing risk. And one of the big areas that I really encourage any sport, any athlete is following the rules of the game. So the rules that are set forth, and they do change, and they have been changing now with our focus on concussion prevention, are there to help reduce the risk. So especially at the beginning of fall sports, or at the beginning of any sports season, I always encourage parents and coaches to stay aware of policy changes, encourage their athletes to follow those policy changes and practice that appropriate play during practice, and make sure that during games, your athletes are following those appropriate rules of play. So one example is that youth or body checking was disallowed in youth hockey. And we did see that actually led to a reduction in concussions in youth hockey. So changes like that. So leading with shoulder for tackles in football is another one that's been implemented. There are ways that make the game, these games, especially anything that's contact, just a little bit safer.
And in terms of, getting a concussion as a kid, versus maybe a concussion as an adult, or maybe it's not relative like that, but how important is it to sort of protect your kid from concussions while they're growing, while they're developing, while they're in school and sort of need, to use every part of their brain every day, if you will? I mean, how important is it to protect those student athletes, as they're growing up in this sort of, very ever-changing stage?
Yeah. Um, the best concussion is no concussion, right? I agree with that. I feel that way as a neuropsychologist, but concussions do happen. And I really think it's important to remember that's not the end all be all, that kids recover really well from concussion, just like kids recover really well from a lot of different medical factors. Kids take a little longer to recover from concussion than an adult. That's because their brains are developing, but not that much longer. We obviously don't want kids to have many concussions. We do want their brains to be protected. But from the standpoint of thinking long term, we just don't have the science to support that. It would lead to some very long term deleterious effect.
Right. And so, I mean, I think if anything from this conversation, hopefully parents or coaches, or, if you are a trainer on our team, you're sort of taking, hey, let's pay attention to our kids and sort of hope that they communicate with us. Is that what you all hope, really, is just that kids will communicate those symptoms to their parents or their trainer?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of pressure on our kids. I know that college recruits are out there right now watching these games, and kids want to play as many games as they can, especially our high school athletes. But if you have a concussion, it's so much better just to take the time off, that week or two off, than try to go back and play, have another concussion, and then be out even longer. So really communicate. I tell kids all the time, just tell your coaches and parents if you don't feel like yourself. A few days off is much better than having to take months off down the road because you've continued to hit your head.
Absolutely. Well, Racheal, thank you so much for, sitting with us this morning. And I really appreciate sort of getting these tips for parents. I had no idea that the cocoon, as you call it, is no longer the protocol. So I think as what you said, students, schools, keeping up with it, understanding what the new protocols are is just so important, because that has changed, since the time that I was a student athlete myself. And that's real. I mean, I guess that we don't have to get into how long, but I think that's really interesting that it continues to evolve. The research continues to evolve in the studies there.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's why we love to do these conversations, to really make sure that everyone's informed of the updated research and how this is developing.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And, for everyone watching this later, there'll be more information up on wavy.com, and you can watch the full conversation on there as well. So, Racheal, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And hopefully everyone will know more about your clinic. And let's hope that people don't have concussions, but if they do, that they follow the signs that you spoke about with communication and understanding the symptoms.
Thank you for taking the time today, Sarah.
Thank you.